Welcome to Slow Night, Ancient Tales, where the world quiets down and old stories come to rest. Tonight, we journey back to 1933 to explore a poignant Korean short story, The Rooster by Hyo-seok. It is a melancholic tale of youth, unexpected missteps, and the heavy burden of coming of age. As we follow a young boy whose spirit feels as broken as the wounded bird in his yard, let go of your own daily struggles. Close your eyes, breathe softly, and let the story softly unfold in the dark. Rooster author, Hyo-seok source, Sam Choli, November 1933. Lately, feeling utterly despondent, Eul-son had come to neglect tending the chickens. The chickens he had raised with such devotion no longer caught his eye nor moved his heart. Seeing them hovering in the front yard at feeding time, he would find himself picking up a stick. The uncleaned coop was unspeakably filthy. Selling 2 chickens amounted to a month's tuition. The gradual decrease in their number inside the co-op didn't cause him much heartache. Rather, he found the sight of the 2 chickens who had escaped their fate of wandering the coop for a month, unable to meet their destined fate at the proper time, an eyesore. His month's worth of tuition for not attending school had increased. Among those 2 was a pathetic rooster, the scruffiest of sights. On top of its shabby appearance, it lost decisively every time it fought the neighbor's chicken. Fresh blood always seemed to flow from its bitten coxcomb, no matter when he looked. It had cloudy, mat-like eyes and limped on one leg. The feathers on its wings were ragged, and even its tail was short. At times, it was even chased by the hens. It was pitiable to behold a rooster that failed to act like a rooster, but lately it had passed beyond pitiable and become purely detestable. Furthermore, the fact that its life inside the co-op had been extended by another month only made it look hateful and hideous to Eul-son. The thought of not being able to go to school was intensely stifling. Picking an apple and being expelled from paradise is a legend, but picking an apple and being expelled from school is a reality. The apples from the farm were forbidden fruit. Eul-son and his friends had broken that law. Rather than saying he was lured by his companions, Eul-son himself had succumbed to the temptation of the apples. The apples were not a luxurious desire, they were a necessary appetite. There were 5 on duty. Perhaps the whole affair started because they were idle with little to do after finishing mounting the silkworms. They chatted while waiting for midnight, then all together left the room, hid themselves in the darkness, and climbed over the orchard's wire fence. Throwing the remnants into the furnace was done flawlessly, but hiding the last one inside the mulberry leaves in the corner of the room was a blunder. The next morning, when the footprints in the orchard became an issue, by ill chance, that single apple was discovered inside the mulberry leaves. The path of investigation was obvious. The 5 who were on duty the previous night were called one by one before their homeroom teacher. Even after making firm vows, somehow or other, it always cracks artfully from somewhere. It seemed that the confession had finally spilled from the mouth of one weak companion. They were called back inside, one by one. When the second recall began, Eul-son was in a strange place. He hadn't entered because his body was heavy, but rather he had chosen that place deliberately to avoid an unpleasant stretch of time. It was a square, cramped space barely large enough for one person to crouch inside. Uncomfortable as it was also the most emotionally peaceful place. When sitting there, it was as if he were submerged in seawater, and his body felt light. Outside on the playground, a seamless flow of companions' voices, laughter, running sounds, mixed with the light thudding of rolling balls drifted in, making his body feel afloat upon those joyful sounds. Eul-son completely forgot about his fellow on-duty companions currently being interrogated, and even his own situation, as he casually took a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. In truth, cigarettes were forbidden like the apples, but breaking rules was a beautiful virtue passed down by human ancestors. Moreover, Eul-son believed that having a puff in that spot was a peerless joy. It was also a peculiar custom of that place that the walls were covered with primitive sketches of nude men and women rendered with crude strokes. Though they were simple lines and clumsy drawings, they provided a certain kind of joy. Receiving a temptation he didn't understand, Eul-son searched his pocket for a blunt pencil and, while exhaling a long plume of fragrant smoke, concentrated his imagination and began to draw a picture. After eating the apples, smoking a cigarette, and doodling, amidst repeating these violations, the sudden thought that he disliked school flashed through Eul-son's mind. For instance, if the teacher who cross-examined the student for picking apples went home and his young son picked apples from the neighbor's field, by what method would the teacher punish him, and what sentiments and reflections would arise within that teacher when recalling his own childhood days of picking apples? Or, how should one explain the case when a teacher who preaches the virtue of abstinence at school falls into wrongful lust, very much like a minister who preaches the 10 Commandments while groaning under the sin of adultery? Considering it closely, wasn't his situation one where, even if he learned specialized science and technology, he didn't even own farmland on which to utilize them? Shabby. Pathetic. Rather than suffering this humiliation hoping for meager wages, he would rather break free from this narrow, uncomfortable yoke and leap out anywhere into the wide world. Eul-son's thoughts didn't know where to stop, like a horse let loose from its reins. A considerable time seemed to have passed. The bell to end the school day rang out chaotically. The next day, his father, wearing his one and only formal outing overcoat, was summoned to the school. It was a punishment of indefinite suspension. His father looked dumbfounded, unable to beat his cherished son. A fierce urge arose in Eul-son to sweep up all the chickens in the coop, sell them off, and run away. But unable to do even that, he left home empty-handed. After wandering around neighboring villages, he returned home 3 days later. Unable to summon the energy to help with farm work, he spent a few days like a fool. The flock of chickens in the coop became an eyesore. Among them, the appearance of the pathetic Rooster was particularly wretched. Its pitiable state, always losing to the neighbor's chickens even when fed rice mixed with red pepper paste, was distressing to watch. "You useless Rooster, aren't you just like me?" Eul-son burst into sudden anger. Since it was a slack time, he was in a position where he could meet Bok-nyeo often, but feeling self-conscious, he rather hesitated. He got the impression that Bok-nyeo certainly didn't view his punishment favorably. Bok-nyeo was a woman of will. Having finished a 6-month course for trainees at the original silkworm seed manufacturing station, she was destined to go out as the township's sericulture instructor starting this coming spring. It was Bok-nyeo who would encourage and push Eul-son to study when he frequently grew negligent. There had been a vow to help each other earn a living once school was finished, but it was certain that Eul-son's current mistake had disappointed Bok-nyeo. An incompetent man, nothing was more meaningless than this to Bok-nyeo. One evening, when he visited Bok-nyeo, everything became absolutely clear to Eul-son. The one who came out was not Bok-nyeo, but Bok-nyeo's mother. When I think about how visits won't be as frequent in the future, it is regrettable beyond measure. As he stood blankly, not understanding the meaning, Bok-nyeo's mother continued, "We have finally managed to find a suitable person." An iron weight of 1,000 pounds seemed to strike down his spine. They said there was a fine man at the cooperative, so without even inquiring further, we finalized it. Thinking he couldn't even look for Bok-nyeo, Eul-son ran out with a hollow feeling. Was it Bok-nyeo's intention or Chun-hyang's mother's doing? There was no need to ask. It felt like the darkness was before his eyes and heaven and earth were collapsing. For a few days, nothing appeared before his eyes. Reality, like a gaunt chestnut shell. More than a month had passed, but there was no notice of reinstatement from the school. It was evening. When the chickens entered the coop to take their respective sleeping places, the rooster that had gone to the village came back sluggishly. It seemed they had fought again. Fresh blood was vivid on its torn coxcomb, and the broken feathers on its wings stood reversed. Limping was general, but the direction it walked was not proper. Looking closely, one eye was distorted. Blood flowed from the closed eye, staining its feathers. It was a wretched sight. Pitying thoughts turned instantly into feelings of hatred. Eul-son burst into a fiery anger. What is the point of living in that state? His bloodthirsty hand trembled violently. Without caring, he threw what came into his hand at the chicken. By fluke, it was a direct hit, and as Eul-son watched it stretch its legs for a moment and flutter, he diverted his gaze. The pitiable scream, broken then continued, seemed to shake Eul-son's very entrails. The boy's silent screams and misdirected anger echo the painful growing pains we all endure when life feels profoundly unfair. The weight of our own shortcomings can sometimes be too heavy to bear, but as the story fades into the quiet of the night, I invite you to release those heavy feelings. Leave your frustrations and worries in the waking world. May your sleep be deep and your tomorrow be gentle. Good night.